I found myself in a predicament from which I was unable to extricate myself. I am a successful businessman, and I am aware that my wife, with whom I have been in a relationship for many years, is unfaithful to me. I love her, but I am unwilling to be deceived. I came to the realization that I had to act with caution, and in the end, I made a decision that would have profound consequences for me. I was concerned that Chris Watkins might be aware of my situation, but I maintained my composure and continued my conversation with Kevin, the bartender, without any indication of distress. I had only recently returned to Texas after a period of self-imposed exile. Imposed exile for a period of 3 years. The question remains, however, as to how she managed to track me down and, more importantly, why I did not acknowledge him in any way. I was on the verge of delivering the punchline to a particularly dirty joke when I felt a hand on my shoulder. "Mr. Watkins, my name is Rob Morgan. I was employed to locate you." I raised an eyebrow and turned my head slightly. "Do you wish to maintain contact with your hand, Robbie?" I felt his hand leave my shoulder and turned back to Kevin. I delivered the punchline and he laughed heartily, consuming another Shiner bow. He informed me that the cost was his responsibility. He proceeded to traverse the length of the bar in a leisurely manner, still chuckling. "Mr. Watkins, I believe there are matters of business that require our attention. I must respectfully inform you that I am not Watkins, and I am not currently seeking employment. However, should you wish to engage my services in a professional capacity, I would be willing to discuss the possibility." Mr. W. Doss, that was. Before he could utter another word, he collapsed onto the floor. I placed $20 on the bar, massaged my right hand, and signaled to Kevin and rose to leave. "You are a challenging individual to locate, and I am disinclined to embark on a new search," I informed him. I then observed the taser gun he was aiming at my crotch. The individual in question was, in fact, the same pest who had previously been observed causing disturbances. Despite being on the floor at the time, he still managed to appear intimidating when standing. He proceeded to wipe a small amount of blood from the corner of his mouth. I informed him that I had no reservations about using the taser, and suggested that he take a seat and engage in a discussion. I became aware of Kevin's approach at this point. I then gestured for him to stay back. He paused, acknowledged with a nod, and said, "Let me know if you need anything." "Bill," I replied. "Thanks, Kevin." I then turned my attention back to the man who was carrying the taser. Given that carrying a taser is illegal in Texas, I found his actions somewhat perplexing. I let out a chuckle and leaned in a bit closer. "Do I know you, boy?" I asked. "Watkins, your manners could use some improvement. You are not from Texas, so please address me as Bill. Tell me who you are and what you want. Is that acceptable, Bill? Kevin, please get us a couple of beers and put it on Robbie's tab." I smiled, settled into the nearest booth, and asked, "Why don't you fill me in?" I inquired about the identity of the individual known as Walken and the nature of the conflict with him. "All right, Bill, we'll proceed as you see fit for now. Mr. Chaz Watkins was a prosperous and prominent Dallas businessman who disappeared without a trace over 3 years ago. He is married to Mrs. Amy Watkins, and they have a 23-year-old child. My name is Rob Morgan. I have been retained to locate Chaz Watkins and return him to Dallas. It has been 3 years since his disappearance. What is my connection to the case? It appears that you have mistaken me for Mr. Watkins. I am neither Mr. Watkins nor a successful businessman. My name is Bill Grant. I am a welder, a cashier, a musician, and a traveler. I have taken meticulous precautions prior to my departure. In the period preceding my departure, I invested a significant amount of money in acquiring an entirely new identity. I altered my appearance by growing my hair and beard, gaining approximately 30 pounds of fat, and gaining around 20 pounds of muscle. If I were to encounter Amy again, she would not be able to recognize me, even if I were to test this by spitting on her upon leaving Dallas. I embarked on a 3-month journey. After a day's journey heading north and west, I located a trailer for lease. I enrolled in a welding class at a local community college and began rebuilding my life. I abandoned everything in Dallas except for cash, a lucrative job, 2 homes, cars, credit cards, keys, a cell phone, clothes, and a deceitful spouse in my new identity. I purchased a used Ford F. I invested $150 in cash, registered the vehicle, and proceeded to a music store where I acquired a used Martin Dreadnought guitar. I departed with only the clothes on my back. I adopted a transient lifestyle, rarely staying in one place for more than 6 or 8 months. I operated without credit cards or a cell phone, working under the table and avoiding tax filings. I attempted to avoid any further involvement with Sarah, but she remained a part of my life. I was unable to completely sever ties with her. Approximately 15 or 16 months after my departure, I sent her an email to assure her of my continued existence. Before each relocation, I continued to send her updates from a public library computer, expressing my love and thoughts for her. I never disclosed the reasons behind my departure. I avoided responding to her inquiries about these topics, which she could have obtained from her mother. Robbie sneered as I mentioned a little over 3 years ago that Mr. Watkins simply vanished, and nobody seemed to have any information about it in the initial year or so. The police pursued the matter rather nonchalantly. It is my opinion that many suspected that he either had an affair with another woman or was the victim of foul play at the hands of Mrs. Watkins. It proved to be a challenging year for Mrs. Watkins on personal, professional, and financial fronts. She attempted to liquidate some of their assets but lacked power of attorney and was unable to legally declare Mr. Watkins dead, leaving her in a bind despite the presence of money. The bank account showed few new deposits and a rapid depletion of funds. She retained legal counsel to assist in the process of having her husband declared deceased. Unfortunately, approximately 16 months after her husband's disappearance, the daughter, Sarah, received an email from an individual claiming to be Mr. Watkins. This development complicated the process of declaring Mr. Watkins deceased. At that juncture, the police concluded their investigation and Mrs. Watkins retained my firm to locate Mr. Chaz Watkins and extradite him to Dallas to face charges of fraud. This would enable Mrs. Watkins to secure sole access and control over the marital assets. I must admit, I found her situation rather amusing. Robbie, please elucidate the role I would play in this scenario. Mr. Watkins, I may call you Chaz, but you may call me Bill. As with everyone else, I am authorized by the state of Texas to forcibly escort you, Chaz Watkins, to the Dallas County Sheriff's Office to answer charges of fraud and abandonment. I found this story amusing, but I am curious about the nature of the fraud. It is unclear when leaving a troubled marriage became a crime in Texas, and why the Dallas County Sheriff would be concerned about such a matter. The argument presented does not appear to be logical or convincing. If you are able to locate Chaz Watkins, it might be advisable to reconsider your approach. Threatening him does not seem to be a productive strategy. He does not appear to be an irrational individual, and convincing him to return to Dallas may be challenging. If he left suddenly, there are other potential explanations. It is likely that there is a good reason for this. Let me assist you with a little role play, Robbie. Why should he come back? What is in it for him? I am guessing that you will need to delve deep to find answers to those questions. I finished my beer and swallowed. You can stash your little laser pointer now, Robbie. It should be placed beneath the table. I pulled back the slide on my Glock. He really should pay more attention to people. He was realizing. A round was now in the chamber of the 9mm, aimed at him. He moved slightly and placed his taser where I had indicated on the table. Let me share a story with you, Robbie. It is one that a friend of mine recounted to me approximately 3 years ago. Are you listening? I will continue. There was this man, Kevin, who was on an expense account. He was married to a woman named Amy, who had a daughter named Sarah. The individual in question, whom I will refer to as Chaz, was married to a woman named Amy. They had a daughter, Sarah. Chaz shared the following account with me. I can recount the moment my marriage fell apart, or at least the moment I realized its impending demise. It happened on Amy's 50th birthday. We had decided to celebrate it at our weekend home in the countryside. Just the two of us. Amy had always been a reserved woman with no inclination for parties or extravagant events. Being fairly affluent, she already had everything she needed and desired, which posed a challenge for me in choosing a suitable gift. However, I spent months contemplating the perfect present. I probed her preferences in conversations and consulted her friends, and I felt content. However, it became evident that she did not share my sentiments when she observed the gifts. Her expression changed, and her face briefly fell before she hastily masked it with forced appreciation. By that point, we had been married for 24 years, and I believed I had a comprehensive understanding of her preferences. It was evident to me that she had expected something entirely different after pondering. This revelation prompted me to inquire about her genuine sentiments. She reassured me that she was content, yet her demeanor appeared constrained. I persisted, and she eventually conceded that the gifts were not aligned with her expectations. She expressed that she had anticipated something more, yet she was unable to articulate precisely what that was. It seemed that she was simply not satisfied with my choice. Given her familiarity with me, I was uncertain how to rectify the situation. I offered my sincerest apologies for inadvertently spoiling what was supposed to be a momentous occasion for her and promised to make amends. She acknowledged that I could make it up to her if I wished. She expressed surprise that her 50th birthday hadn't received more thoughtful consideration from me. I attempted to clarify my rationale behind each of the gifts to her, but the more I spoke, the more irritated she grew. Eventually, she became visibly agitated. I promised to make it up to her, to which she responded that if I had given her sufficient consideration from the outset, I would not have needed to make amends. She then asked how I could possibly make up for such a colossal mistake. She then mentioned feeling unwell and expressed a desire to return home to Dallas. We rode home in silence, both of us seething with frustration. The marriage that eventually took place was not a certainty during my college years. We maintained a long-distance relationship. The couple had a long-distance relationship, with Amy being 3 years older and already having graduated. During a visit, I discovered Amy's infidelity while strolling downtown. We were approached by a tall older man, likely around 50 years of age, who warmly hugged Amy. Amy introduced us, and when he shook my hand, he smirked. His handshake was weak, a trait my father warned me to be cautious about. I became instantly wary of him and disliked him. "Nice to meet you, Dan. Are you?" A friend of Amy's father, though I was unable to discern precisely what it was, I sensed something amiss. Amy seemed flustered, and he exuded smugness. I discovered that they had been seeing each other for approximately a month. I even found their love letters, which were readily available. We had agreed to be exclusive, but when I confronted her, she denied it, claiming that they were just friends. I informed her that I was ending the relationship. I immediately terminated the relationship and ceased all communication. I did not respond to her calls or messages, and I discarded her letters without reading them. When her friends reached out, I chose to ignore them. Even when my friends pleaded her case, I instructed them to convey that she was free to pursue relationships and marry whomever she pleased, including her grandfather. I consider being deceived a highly unfavorable aspect of a relationship. Eventually, she sought me out. Despite my initial reluctance, she eventually succeeded in persuading me to give our relationship a second chance. However, I maintained strict control over the situation for an extended period, making it clear that any further instances of infidelity would result in the dissolution of our marriage. 2 years later, we finally tied the knot, despite the fact that our marriage had lasted for a mere 11 years. Various factors, including my excessive drinking, work commitments, and frequent travels, had contributed to the deterioration of our relationship. The relationship was significantly affected by these circumstances, and Amy was no longer interested in sharing her life with me. We engaged in frequent arguments, during which I offered to reduce my work hours and control my drinking habits for the sake of our young daughter, Sarah. Amy agreed to these terms, imposing significant restrictions while gradually separating our finances and lives. She maintained that she was simply preparing for the inevitable, and I expressed frustration that she seemed indifferent to making things work. However, she simply dismissed my concerns and left the room. Despite this, I remained determined to maintain control of the situation. Over the following couple of years, she became more relaxed, which I believe was primarily due to my significantly higher income. In fact, I paid more in taxes than she earned in a year. Maintaining separate finances only benefited me, as it enabled me to pursue my own interests without consulting her. I acquired a couple of motorcycles, a sizable sailboat, took flying lessons, and purchased a Cessna aircraft. I undertook lessons and purchased a Cessna, while adorning myself in designer suits and driving a recent model BMW. Our second home, a 50-acre weekend retreat in the countryside, was acquired without any financial assistance from her. I consistently contributed to household expenses and funded all family vacations, yet still I was living a life she desired a larger share of. Consequently, she eased up. It is unclear whether we ever truly recovered from that. 2 years ago, I considered divorcing her. Amy became increasingly confrontational, transforming into a shrew. I felt like her subordinate, and our intimacy dwindled, occurring perhaps twice a year. When it did happen, it felt more like a mere scratching of an itch for both of us. There was no closeness, no love. I suspected she might have cheated on me, but lacked concrete proof. I don't believe she engaged in long-term affairs. She was aware of the occurrence of both short-term and casual sexual encounters during her professional activities. In addition, she became adept at concealing her infidelity. Our daughter had recently departed for college, and after a particularly harsh and public assault on my character and attractiveness one evening, I reached my breaking point. I issued an ultimatum, stating that either we actively strive to become a stronger, more affectionate couple with an improved communication and a satisfying sex life, or we part. I no longer wished to exist as two people merely tolerating each other's presence. I had to formally serve her with divorce papers before she agreed to engage in a conversation. We argued for days, marking the first meaningful communication in years. Surprisingly, she expressed reluctance to divorce, which caught me off guard. In response, she vowed to recommit to our relationship, and actively, despite my initial skepticism, I eventually acquiesced to her proposal, largely due to my affection for her. We established new rules for engagement and communication, embarking on the journey to mend our marriage. I took the initiative to encourage her participation, yet it felt as though I was the one steering the ship while she remained a passive observer. Over the course of the following year, I expressed my desire for her to take a more active role in the marriage, even occasionally driving. She agreed to this, but she continued to stay in the background despite her own grievances, which I listened to and acknowledged. I made efforts to address each concern I had. I had deep feelings for her, and although she rarely took the initiative to enhance our marriage, she willingly engaged in everything I suggested. As a result, we began to communicate more effectively and experienced a notable increase in the quality and frequency of our intimate interactions, which occurred approximately twice a week, and sometimes even more. While she was not as sexually adventurous as she had been in the early years of our marriage, she agreed to explore new experiences and seemed content. I felt at ease, believing that we were content, but I sensed that she was holding back. After her 50th birthday, a few weeks passed, and our connection appeared to cool off, particularly in regard to affection, which diminished, and our sexual intimacy gradually decreased. When I inquired about this, she attributed it to work stress, promising a return to normalcy. However, once her schedule calmed down, this did not occur. I did not find anything alarming about her late-night work hours during projects, as it was a common occurrence. However, it began to become apparent that her work hours were more excessive than usual. It became evident that her behavior was more excessive than usual. Despite plausible excuses, I found myself spending more weekends alone at our country home. I decided to wait it out. The following 6 weeks, we only had sex twice. Both times, I initiated the encounter. However, on one occasion, she seemed to be merely tolerating my advances. After one session in which she hardly participated, she rolled over to sleep. On another occasion, she simply left the room during the evenings and weekends. When avoidance was impossible or challenging, she appeared bored at best, but more frequently, she seemed irritated. I recognized the familiar pattern, which I had observed over the past 2 years. We had dedicated part of our effort to addressing any arising issues before they escalated into full-blown conflicts. Even when conflicts did arise, our objective was to address them in a more constructive manner. This entailed maintaining an impersonal stance, persistently pursuing resolutions, and striving to comprehend each other's perspectives. We had a zero-tolerance policy for avoidance, excuses, and non-participation. Our primary focus was on acknowledging and addressing the feelings of the aggrieved party, rather than deflecting responsibility or avoiding discussions. However, when I raised concerns about her schedule, lack of affection, and the stagnant state of our intimate life, she resisted discussing them, despite my attempts over several days. She disregarded our agreement on the rules of engagement and communication. Instead, she told me to disregard the rules and leave her alone, suppressing my anger. I reminded her that we had deemed these rules important and non-negotiable. In response, she stated that I should negotiate with my right hand and leave her be. Her message was unambiguous: she was unfaithful. While Texas is a no-fault state, I desired the truth. However, it seemed that our marriage was irreparably damaged, and her infidelity might not make a significant difference legally. I could not tolerate being lied to, and this time she would face the consequences. Consequences. I had consistently emphasized my stance on fidelity and honesty. I acknowledged that attraction is beyond one's control but insisted that actions are a choice. I informed her that if she was so drawn to someone else that she couldn't resist, we should divorce first. While it would be painful, I would appreciate her honesty and respect for waiting until we were legally separated and could part ways amicably to some extent. I promised to extend the same courtesy to her. I needed certainty and had tasks at hand approximately 8 years prior to merging our finances. I had diverted some of my money into an investment account without informing my wife. Additionally, I had arranged with my employer to direct all my bonuses into the rationale behind maintaining secrecy regarding this newly created account can be attributed to my wife's inclination to oversee our financial matters. I, on the other hand, held the conviction that I could more effectively navigate investments. As it transpired, my investment portfolio exhibited remarkable growth despite my wife's insistence on filing taxes separately, a practice initiated 13 years ago. In the context of long-term employment, the provision of tax preparation services was never reconciled on this matter, with the suspicion that she might be concealing money. The decision to keep the investment account secret was justified on the grounds of maintaining financial privacy. The intention was to surprise her with the funds during our retirement, assuming that we would reach that milestone. From my perspective, if she were not unfaithful and we decided to divorce, I would willingly divide our assets. However, if she were cheating, that would alter the circumstances. In such a scenario, it would be necessary to find a way to safeguard my finances, given the implications of betrayal and dishonesty. Furthermore, it was imperative that I devise a strategy to gain control of our joint accounts and sell our Dallas home, despite its being in my name. She had a strong attachment to it, particularly when attempting to retain our country property. I held a deep affection for that place, envisioning it as our retirement destination. I was reluctant to relinquish or sell it if it seemed unfeasible to retain it for myself. I was resolute in selling it before allowing her to take it. I had invested a decade in paying for furnishings and maintaining the property. As far as I was concerned, she had no entitlement to it. I was willing to give her the Dallas house if it meant preserving my country home. Initially, I had considered selling it simply because she loved it. However, this process would require time, and given the uncertainty of whether she might serve me with divorce papers soon, I got to work immediately. My first task was consulting a lawyer. I contacted an old college friend who was a corporate lawyer in Dallas. We met at a nearby roadhouse that evening for dinner and a couple of beers. I informed him of my situation and requested a referral to a family law attorney. I also sought his personal and legal insights into my predicament. The legal advice he provided was discouraging. Essentially, I was in a difficult position. If I pursued a divorce, there was no viable legal means to shield my assets from her. Despite the disapproval of the traditional network in Texas, assets were to be divided equally between the two parties, regardless of the circumstances. The concept of no fault meant that a potential 50-50 split in a minor alimony payment to Amy was to be made, regardless of the circumstances. It seemed that, in the eyes of the law, if she was cheating, it was a case of no harm, no foul. The suggestion was to give her half of everything and watch as she moved in with her boyfriend while I continued to pay alimony. He proposed that, from a legal standpoint, I should refrain from taking any action that would affect my marital status. I regarded him with disbelief. He then advised me to avoid pursuing a divorce and to instead attempt to alter the dynamic of the relationship. He recommended that I investigate whether she was being unfaithful and, if so, to confront her and her partner. He advised me to make a clean break and to take whatever I could with me. He further advised me to let her bear the financial burden of a divorce and to attempt to salvage whatever I could secure. He advised me to consult with a formidable family lawyer, someone he considered to be particularly skilled and capable. He believed this legal professional would be the most effective in representing him in the event of his own divorce. Consequently, Amy's free ride was over. She continued to avoid me, and I allowed her to do so. I ceased inquiring about her schedule, weekends, or our diminishing intimacy. She seemed to interpret this as a concession on my part. It was as if I had resigned myself to the new reality. I spent the majority of my time at our country home and seldom I encountered her once more, and it seemed as though she was pleased by this. My new divorce attorney assisted me in modifying the beneficiaries on my will and insurance policies. She also advised me to hire a private investigator, stating that while Texas is a no-fault state, visual evidence can influence negotiations in a favorable manner. I concurred with this assessment and she suggested an ex-partner with a successful track record. Her assistant scheduled a meeting for me that afternoon, and I selected the comprehensive surveillance package was installed, wiring the entire premises for sound and video in a matter of days. The perpetrator was identified, along with the time, manner, and duration of the crime. Video evidence was obtained, which my lawyer believed could be crucial in the event of a divorce. A week later, I reviewed the evidence, which revealed more devastation than anticipated. Even my backup plan seemed less viable. The intimate encounter did not appear particularly special. His techniques were not superior, and he was unable to satisfy her on a regular basis. She engaged in the same activities with him as she had with me, but her lover took every opportunity to criticize me verbally. She enthusiastically suggested they engage in intimate acts in my bed, which they did. She did not insist on him using a condom and even contemplated a way to involve me in a cream pie scenario since I had not. After a period of interest, the couple discussed ways to overcome the obstacle of my involvement. Initially, he had proposed cutting me off, but now the idea of me being intimate with her after he had been excited by her as well as by Amy consumed him. I realized that I did not truly know this woman. Discovering your spouse's infidelity and witnessing it firsthand are entirely different experiences. I had no strength left to fight. I secured the video evidence and entrusted it to my lawyer for safekeeping, specifying that it should be passed on to my daughter in the event of my demise. I prepaid my daughter Sarah's college tuition from our joint savings account. I subsequently liquidated my investment account, planning to sustain myself without restraint. I would live off the funds from my investment account for years. However, our joint savings account was significantly diminished 2 weeks later. I took a final look around the house. I then proceeded to accept my decision, leaving my keys, cell phone, and wallet on the foyer desk, where I had previously placed them. I removed my wedding ring and placed it on the pillow of what had previously been my side of the bed. I then departed without speaking to anyone or leaving any letters. I walked out the front door without bothering to close it and proceeded around the corner, entered my new pickup truck, and drove away. 2 weeks later, a married man in his 40s and a father of 3 was the victim of a brutal mugging after leaving a Motel 6, which is ironically known for its affordability. Although he would eventually walk again, it would take some time, and he would have a noticeable limp. 1 month after the assault, his wife received a FedEx package containing a video that revealed him in a compromising situation with a woman who appeared to be in her early 50s. 1 year later, they divorced, leaving him financially destitute following my departure. I then proceeded to drive aimlessly. For 3 days, I had no concrete plan. Eventually, I stopped in a small town for lunch and decided to stay for a while. I enrolled in welding classes at a local community college. After 12 months, I secured a welding job at an auto body shop. Despite lacking official certification, I found plenty of opportunities for cash jobs. Many people preferred the affordability of an uncertified welder for smaller tasks that certified welders were not interested in taking on. I was not interested in taking on additional responsibilities. I found satisfaction in my job for an additional 4 months before realizing it was time for a change. Over the following 2 years, I traveled across the country, occasionally stopping in small towns to engage in personal pursuits and pursue my welding hobby. It was a period of enjoyment, it was a stark contrast to the previous years. My position in Dallas had been a source of resentment despite the lucrative pay, and the daily grind became a significant challenge to face each morning. I endured it for the sake of my family. Amy anticipated my sacrifice, and Sarah deserved the stability. Amy valued the financial benefits, which allowed her to maintain a virtuous image by working for a non-profit organization. However, the organization was predominantly staffed by wealthy businessmen's wives seeking purpose and visibility. Their high-profile fundraising events were featured in the local social scene, and the staff's extravagant dresses cost more than most patrons earned in a year of hard work. This was a disheartening aspect of the situation, as a significant portion of the funds raised merely fueled the next charity event. Primarily, they were helping themselves feel better about their own lives. Meanwhile, I toiled in a job I despised because of my love for my family and the societal expectations placed upon me. Upon leaving, I was confronted with a set of expectations that I had not anticipated. In response, I made a conscious decision to prioritize personal fulfillment in all future endeavors. Over the course of the following 3 years, I engaged in intimate relationships with several women. I derived pleasure from these encounters and genuinely wished for their enjoyment as well. My primary focus was on my own satisfaction. I had no intention of settling down, and, if any of these relationships became overly attached or posed challenges, I had no intention of allowing them to persist. I terminated the relationship without difficulty. My objective was solely physical. I was not seeking a friend or a life partner. Since that time, I have progressed and have no desire to revisit the past. I am unaware of and unconcerned about the fate of Amy, the house, or the 50 acres in the countryside. She has made gains in her life, and if she is content with them, I can accept that. However, I harbor a secret hope that she is miserable and financially struggling, although I will not actively pursue such an outcome. I am actively seeking such an outcome. There is a part of me that wishes to reunite with my daughter someday, but only if she can assure me that Amy will not be informed. Unfortunately, she is finding it challenging to make that promise. I continue to hold on to that hope. As far as I understand, Robbie, my friend, is currently content. He left behind an unfaithful partner and a miserable job. He does not spare a thought for his troublesome ex-partner. It is difficult to comprehend why he would return to a situation that would inevitably result in further unhappiness and deception. His current circumstances are markedly different. He is now in a position of happiness, health, and prosperity. His previous marriage was a source of significant distress. Upon finally recognizing this, he came to the realization that the only 2 positive outcomes of that relationship were his daughter and eventually his freedom. He concluded that he was the only one truly invested in the marriage. His wife's contributions to the marriage were limited to physical intimacy. Additionally, he noted that after leaving the marriage and engaging in relationships with other women, he realized that even the physical intimacy she provided was not particularly noteworthy. In retrospect, he recognized that she never made a genuine effort to improve the marriage, not even once she deceived him for an extended period of 24 years. This does not seem to be a situation that is worth persevering with or returning to. Kev, how about a couple more beers? He confided in me that he believed his wife was a certified narcissist. He thus adopted a strategy of cruel indifference, which he believed would be the ultimate blow to her. However, he was unsure how he could maintain indifference if he remained in her presence. He concluded that by leaving everything behind, he would not only convey his indifference towards her but also towards their entire shared life. He understood it might take years, but he was confident that she would eventually falter and fail, and in that he would emerge victorious. Robbie sighed and nodded, saying, "You're quite the intriguing character, Bill." "That's quite a. Where is your associate these days?" I inquired, maintaining an air of indifference. "Who knows? Robbie may be elsewhere, engaging in illicit activities or working on a project. It is unlikely that he is struggling to support an ungrateful and unfaithful partner. My guess is that he is in Wisconsin. He mentioned wanting to visit there, wherever he is. I imagine he is content and not looking to change a thing. Why doesn't Mrs. Watkins just file for divorce on grounds of abandonment?" I asked. "This would give her control over the marital assets she desires. It seems like an easy solution to her." The issue can be resolved without further pursuit of the individual known as Chaz. This course of action avoids potential conflicts with unknown individuals. Bill, there are no remaining assets to control. The attempt to file under abandonment was unsuccessful due to the loss of the house, rural property, and employment. The circumstances surrounding this loss are unclear. The continued search for the individual in question is perplexing. The financial constraints led to the inability to maintain the properties, resulting in foreclosure. The house was purchased by an elderly couple in a rural setting. Estate by a company called CWW LLC, which is a metal arts consulting firm. Mrs. Watkins lost her job when her affair with a married colleague was exposed. She has experienced a series of unfortunate events. He nodded in agreement. I apologize for wasting your time, but I did find our meeting almost enjoyable. He pulled out $40 from his wallet, tossed it on the table, stood up, and offered me his hand. No hard feelings, he said. Consider yourself lucky that I'm a patient guy. He emitted a brief, mirthful sound as he turned away after taking approximately 6 steps. He then paused and, without facing me, inquired, "Is it worth noting that Amy still harbors feelings for him?" He then continued, "Amy has expressed remorse and had hoped to reconcile with him. She is currently experiencing a state of depression and engaging in excessive drinking. Her condition is not improving." He then added, "Women like her do not fully comprehend the essence of love. Their affection is directed towards themselves and the benefits they perceive others provide. They are opportunistic and capable of considering others, driven by greed. Their actions are unsightly. If she were genuinely remorseful, she would cease her involvement with other men. Her remorse is solely motivated by the fear of being exposed and the prospect of losing financial support. If she were truly repentant, she might consider her daughter's feelings and the suffering caused by the absence of a relationship with her father. She might also reflect on the pain she has inflicted on her husband and consider leaving him. She does not deserve him, yet she is unwilling to acknowledge this. In her distorted and unhealthy worldview, she perceives herself as the center of the universe. She believes that reality, responsibility, love, respect, and honesty only matter when they align with her agenda. It is evident that he and his daughter deserve better." He slowly turned to address me. "Yes, Bob, Wisconsin experiences harsh winters, but I do know that Sarah enjoys it there. Perhaps CWW LLC should consider relocating their office to Rylander." "Thank you, Bob. That is certainly a possibility. It just might happen."